A crimson trail snaked across the frost-hardened ground, winding from the tree line down toward the weather-worn barn. It hadn't been there the night before. Ethan Cole stood barefoot in the snow rifle hanging loosely in one hand, steam from his breath curling into the brittle morning air. His boot prints sank beside the smaller, ragged indentations in the snow. Child's size staggered and smeared with blood. Something had crawled here. Or tried. The sun hadn't yet broken the line of the hills, but the sky was bruising purple clouds low and heavy, thick with unfallen snow. Wind howled softly between the slats of the barn, pushing against Ethan's threadbare coat. Then he saw it, a small shape collapse just outside the fence, motionless. A boy no more than 9, dark-haired, shirtless, ribs sharp beneath skin the color of old copper. Blood caked one thigh. His face was turned down, black hair frozen into the dirt. Ethan moved slowly. A buzzard circled high above. The boy stirred just barely. One eye opened, unfocused, cracked lips parting to mumble something Ethan couldn't hear. The rifle clattered to the ground. Ethan knelt, pressing 2 fingers to the boy's throat. Still alive. A low groan escaped the child's mouth. Ethan looked toward the woods again, half expecting pursuit, ambush, a trap. Nothing moved. Just the wind and the hollow silence of a land too familiar with death. He lifted the boy light as a sack of grain, arms and legs limp as rope. As he carried him toward the house, snow began to fall, slow, fat flakes that erased the tracks as they came. Ethan's cabin was a crooked thing of old logs and patched chinks leaning into the hillside like a drunk too proud to fall. Smoke crept from the chimney and the rusted stovepipe rattled whenever the wind blew hard. Inside, the walls were lined with tools and silence. A battered chair, a cot, a table scarred with knife marks. It wasn't much, but it had been enough for Ethan. For 7 years it had been enough. He laid the boy near the stove and wrapped him in a thick wool blanket. Snow melted off the child's skin, pooling beneath him, steam rising. Ethan lit the lantern and set water to boil. The boy's chest moved slow, shallow, but steady now. A deep gash above the knee oozed dark blood. Ethan unrolled a strip of linen, poured whiskey over the wound. The boy twitched but didn't wake. His lips moved again. Still no sound. Ethan hesitated. Then, with hands that hadn't touched another soul in a long time, he gently pressed the cloth against the wound and tied it off. The child's skin was cold. Ethan added more wood to the stove and crouched beside him. "You got no name for me, huh?" he muttered. "Guess I don't either." In the corner sat an old tin box, dented and blackened. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a letter, half burned, its edges singed, words fading. He held it with care as if it might still speak to him. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it past." The rest was ash. He never needed to read beyond that. Her name was a pony. She had walked beside him through fire and exile, and then she was gone. Taken in a winter march no one survived. He had kept the letter anyway. Every winter it burned colder. He returned the letter to the box, sealed it, and looked at the child again. A pony had worn her hair like that when she was young, long parted in the middle, woven with beads she'd carved herself. The boy had one too, hanging from a string around his neck. A hawk feather painted red at the tip. Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. Hadn't spoken to anyone but the wind and the cattle. When the snows came, he stopped checking the trail. No one came this far anymore, just coyotes sometimes. Wolves in worse winters. He remembered a time he was different, when he believed things could be changed with a strong enough back and a clean shot. But those years were buried under dust and snow. Now he trapped rabbits, kept to himself, and tried not to dream. The boy stirred again. Ethan brought a cup of hot water to his lips. "Easy now," he whispered. "You just drink. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." The boy drank, just a little. But his eyes opened wider, and for a second they locked on Ethan's. Deep brown, almost black eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that didn't trust anything. Ethan understood. He didn't trust anything either. He sat down on the chair beside the cot and watched the snow fall through the window. A hawk called out in the distance, then silence again. Ethan didn't know where the boy had come from or why he'd collapsed at his barn. But something old and restless stirred inside him, something he thought long dead, a part of him that once knew how to protect. For 2 days the boy said nothing. He didn't cry, didn't moan, didn't beg. He drank when Ethan offered water, swallowed a few spoonfuls of rabbit stew, and slept for hours at a time, his body curled small against the cot's edge like he was trying to disappear inside it. Ethan changed the bandage twice a day. The wound was angry and red but healing. On the 3rd morning the boy woke before Ethan. He was sitting upright, staring at the flame in the stove legs, wrapped in a blanket like a cocoon. Ethan stirred from the chair, bones cracking. "You ain't gonna say nothing, huh?" he muttered. The boy looked at him but didn't answer. Ethan nodded, pulled on his boots, and grabbed his rifle. "Fine. I talk enough for both of us." He stepped out to check the traps. Snow had blanketed the valley during the night, ankle deep and crusted at the top. He moved slowly, eyes on the trees. The woods felt quieter than usual. No tracks, no crows, just the wind, low and constant. Something itched at the back of his neck. Not fear, not yet, but close. Back inside, he tossed 2 rabbits on the table. The boy watched without blinking. "You ever skinned one of these?" Ethan asked. The boy didn't move. Ethan shrugged. "Figure you're watching anyhow." He worked the blade clean and slow, laying the hides out to dry. The boy studied every movement. That afternoon, Ethan slid a piece of jerky toward him. The boy picked it up and held it in his palm for a long moment before eating. "Thank you." No nod, but he stayed close to the stove, closer than before. That night, Ethan found the boy clutching the hawk feather in his fist. It was a small thing, but Ethan noticed the way the child curled around it like it held back the dark. He said nothing, didn't ask questions. He just lit the lantern and placed it on the floor beside the cot. The boy fell asleep watching the flickering light. In the days that followed, Ethan cleared a spot in the barn and set up a cot with fresh straw and a blanket. The boy wouldn't speak, but he followed Ethan silently, helping carry wood, feeding the chickens, sweeping the steps with a pine branch. He moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, always watching. Ethan named him Hawk. It wasn't much of a name, but it felt right. The boy never confirmed or denied it. He just listened always. Every time Ethan caught him glancing toward the woods, there was something behind the eyes. Not fear exactly, more like memory. Something was out there, something he'd run from. And whatever it was, it hadn't given up. One morning, Ethan found a line of stones laid neatly beside the barn. 6 small river stones, round and gray, placed in a perfect row. He hadn't put them there. Hawk didn't look at them when asked. But that night, Ethan heard the boy whisper something in a language he didn't know, barely a breath. Words given to the wind, a prayer maybe, or a warning. Ethan didn't sleep well after that. The next day he saw smoke on the horizon. Not a campfire, not a homestead. A long, dirty pillar rising above the trees like a scar in the sky. Hawk stood beside him at the edge of the clearing, the hawk feather clutched tight in his fingers. Ethan didn't say a word. He just reached for his rifle. Something was coming. They came from the north with dust in their teeth and blood in their mouths. 10 men mounted and hard-eyed, their coats patched with black leather and red cloth rifles strapped to their saddles. Pistols hanging low on their hips. The leader rode a tall roan stallion and wore a cavalry coat turned inside out, brass buttons dulled to a green tarnish. He had one eye, the left gone white and cloudy, the lid scarred like melted wax. They called themselves the Flint Riders. Once a Union scout unit, now a band of mercenaries who carved their own justice through the plains. Nobody hired them, they hired themselves to death. They came to settle old debts, purge stray savages, and collect bounties whispered through saloons and trading posts. Their reputation outpaced their tracks. Ethan watched them from the ridge above the creek, lying prone in the snow-scope, steady. They were still 2 miles out, resting their horses near the charred remains of a Lakota camp. Smoke drifted from the last dying embers. Bodies lay twisted in the snow, men, women, and at least one child. Ethan's stomach clenched. He didn't look away. The leader dismounted and crouched near the edge of the fire, lifting something from the ashes, a painted toy, broken and blackened. He turned it in his hand and smiled. Then he looked up toward the hills. Ethan froze. The man couldn't see him from here, not possible, but that smile stayed with him even as he backed down the ridge. That night Hawk didn't sleep. He paced. Ethan sat by the stove gun across his lap. "They burned a village," he said, voice low. "You from there?" Hawk didn't answer. He stood at the window watching the trees. Ethan stared into the fire. "Flint Riders. I thought they disbanded after Fort Laramie." He spat into the ashes. "Guess they found something worth hunting." Hawk turned slow and deliberate and pulled up the leg of his trousers. The bandage was gone. In its place, a deep scar shaped like a flint arrowhead. Ethan's breath caught. The mark was known. Flint Riders left it on their captives. Survivors. Escaped or released didn't matter, it was a promise. "We'll finish what we started." Ethan stood. "You ran from them." Hawk nodded once. "And now they're coming here." Hawk looked at the hawk feather in his hand, then back to Ethan. "They won't stop," Ethan muttered. "Not till they've burned it all." Morning came with a bitter wind. The horses were restless. Ethan saddled his mare Ruby and checked the traps, all empty. The air felt wrong. Still. Even the crows were silent. He laid a shotgun by the front door, a repeater over the mantel, and filled a crate with ammunition. Hawk helped without asking. They moved like men who'd done this before, placing cover points, dragging logs across the yard for barricades, filling barrels with water. Ethan dug out his old duster, the one he hadn't worn since a pony died. It still smelled of pine smoke and horse sweat. He slipped the half-burned letter into the inside pocket. He didn't know why. Maybe because if this was the end, he didn't want to go without her words close. As the sun dropped, Ethan spotted them 10 riders at the tree line, fanned in a crescent. The leader moved forward alone, hands resting on his saddle horn. "That boy in there belongs to us," he called out, voice rasped like gravel on bone. "We ain't looking for blood if we don't have to spill it. But we always finish our hunt." Ethan stepped onto the porch rifle, resting across both hands. "He ain't yours." The man smiled, teeth-yellowed, eyes cold. "He's got the mark. That means he's our business, not anymore." The man leaned forward in the saddle. "You got 10 seconds to change your mind." Ethan shook his head. "You had 10 years to get off my land." The leader blinked. Recognition flickered. "Cole," he said. "You're her man. That Lakota whore who ran with white boots." Ethan's jaw clenched. "That woman buried more brave men than you've ever known." The leader's smile disappeared. "So be it." He turned his horse, lifted his hand. The riders fanned out, forming a wide circle. Ethan stepped back into the cabin, shut the door, and bolted it. Hawk sat beside the window, cradling the repeater. "You ready?" Ethan asked. The boy nodded. There were no more words to share, just the sound of hooves circling the cabin, just the creak of old wood bracing for fire, just the breath of 2 souls waiting for war. The first shot came from the east side, cracked through the window, shattered glass, and burned a line across Ethan's shoulder. He didn't cry out, just dropped low and returned fire, the crack of his Winchester tearing through the dusk. A man screamed outside. Then the flames began. A lit torch sailed through the barn loft, caught dry hay, and spread like a scream across the sky. The barn was gone in minutes, smoke churning thick, and black cattle panicked and bolting into the trees. Ethan pulled Hawk back from the window. "Stay low. Only fire when I say." The boy's face was ash-gray, but steady hands clenched on the repeater's grip. More gunfire echoed. The riders were circling fast, firing in bursts, trying to draw them out. Ethan counted 6 rifles, 2 shotguns, and the leader, that bastard with the white eye, likely carrying a Colt Army tucked under that coat. No time to count again. The door splintered as a boot slammed into it. Ethan fired once through the gap. A man crumpled backward, cursing in blood. Hawk scrambled to reload. They moved like a pair, Ethan firing, Hawk spotting. One rider slipped through the back window, knife in hand. Hawk saw him, first shouted. Ethan spun and leveled him in one shot, close enough that the man's breath was still warm when he fell. The cabin was filling with smoke. Not from the fire, from the guns, the heat, the fury. Ethan's eyes watered. His shoulder throbbed. He was bleeding heavier now, soaking into the fabric. No time. Another rider crept low along the wall. Hawk fired, missed. The man turned, raised his gun. Ethan dropped him. "You did fine," Ethan rasped. "Just breathe." Hawk's chest heaved. His face was wet from smoke or tears. Ethan didn't know. Outside, the riders regrouped. 6 were down. That left 4. And the leader. A long silence stretched. Then a voice called out, "You're making this worse than it needs to be." Cole Ethan stepped to the window. "That boy ain't yours." "Never was," the man laughed. "He's a message same as the rest. You shelter him, you burn with him." Ethan's hand tightened on the frame. "Then you better bring more matches." They came again, fast, ruthless. One on the roof, one at the door, one through the cellar. Hawk spotted the roofman, pointed. Ethan aimed, fired. The man tumbled down, caught in his own saddle strap, neck bent wrong. The cellar burst open. Ethan turned too slow. The man inside knocked him to the floor. His rifle slid away. They grappled, fists, elbows, blood. Ethan took a punch to the face, tasted iron. Then the stranger yanked a knife free. Hawk screamed. The blade plunged down. Ethan caught the man's wrist barely. His strength was fading. He heard the boy behind him, heard footsteps, then the crack of the repeater. The man jerked once, eyes wide, and fell sideways, dead. Hawk stood behind him, shaking the rifle, smoking. His eyes were wild, but there was no fear now. Just fury. Ethan pulled himself upright, breathing hard. "Good," he muttered. "Damn good. 2 left." Outside, the leader's voice rose again. "You're making your own funeral, Cole." Ethan limped to the door, rifle in hand. "You burned my wife's people. You branded this boy like cattle. You think that makes you righteous?" Silence. Then footsteps. One last rider stepped into the open, hands up, young, barely older than Hawk, blood on his coat. "I'm done," he said. "I didn't sign up for this." Ethan watched him closely. The boy tossed his rifle into the snow and turned, disappearing into the trees. That left the leader. Ethan stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The night was black, but the fire from the barn lit the yard in hellish orange. The man stood alone now, coat flapping in the wind, pistol drawn. "One of us ends here, Cole." Ethan raised his rifle. "Reckon so." The man fired first. Ethan dropped to a knee, felt the bullet sing past his ear. He fired, missed. The man advanced, firing again. Ethan staggered, hit in the thigh, dropped to one knee. Pain lanced through him. The world tilted. Hawk stood at the doorway, screaming something. The man turned to shoot him. Ethan, bleeding and barely conscious, lifted his rifle one last time and fired. The shot hit center chest. The man froze. His pistol dropped. He fell backward into the snow, dead. Silence, thick and holy. Ethan collapsed. Hawk ran to him, pressed against the wound. Blood bubbled between Ethan's teeth. "It's all right," he rasped. "You're all right." The barn burned behind them, sparks drifting up like fireflies toward the stars. Snow fell again, soft, steady, uncaring. In the stillness, distant sounds echoed through the trees. Drums, low and slow like thunder rolling beneath the earth. Hawk stood up, eyes wide. Ethan tried to speak, but the boy was already gone, sprinting into the trees, hawk feather flapping behind him. Then the woods lit with torches. Shadows moved. Tall figures stepped from the darkness, dozens, then hundreds. Warriors in furs and paint faces, stern weapons ready, not attacking, watching, waiting. Hawk ran to them and they opened their ranks. A tall man with braids stepped forward, lifted the boy into his arms and turned toward Ethan's burning homestead. The boy looked back once, then was gone into the crowd. The warriors stood still. One stepped forward and placed something in the snow beside Ethan. A feather, red-tipped. Ethan closed his eyes. Peace at last drifted in with the snow. Ethan drifted in and out of pain, breath shallow, blood thick in his mouth. The world came in flashes, fire, crackling snow, hissing on the embers, the muffled sound of boots and fresh powder. Then a hand on his chest. Gentle, firm, not the boy's. Older, strong. He blinked. A face appeared above him, dark eyes, long hair streaked with gray, 2 feathers tied behind one ear. The man's face was painted white streaks along the jaw, a red slash across the nose. A warrior. The man did not speak. He looked down at Ethan, then gave a slow nod, the kind given between 2 men who've each walked the edge of the world and lived to crawl back. Around them, the warriors had formed a wide circle. Silent, reverent. They did not touch Ethan, nor did they draw their weapons. They stood like oaks in winter, tall and unmoved by storm. Then the boy Hawk emerged from the ranks, standing beside the tall man. In the flicker of torchlight, Ethan saw it the feather Hawk wore wasn't just decoration. It was a mark of lineage. The red tip meant something. The boy stepped forward and knelt beside Ethan. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a medicine pouch wrapped in deerskin. Gently, he pressed it to Ethan's wound. The pain dulled, not gone, but softened. Ethan stared at the boy, and for the first time the boy spoke. "You saved the son of Running Elk." His voice was quiet, but sure, each word careful, like they had been practiced many times in silence. Ethan blinked. Running Elk, the Lakota war chief who vanished 3 winters ago after refusing a peace treaty. Rumor said he'd been killed, that his family had been slaughtered. The man standing above them now was no rumor. He was here, alive. And Hawk, this child, was his son. Ethan tried to speak, but blood bubbled on his lips. Running Elk knelt. "You did what others would not," he said in heavily accented English. "You sheltered my blood, fought for him, bled for him." He reached into his own cloak and pulled out a small carved pipe wrapped in buffalo hide. He placed it beside Ethan's hand. "This is not payment. It is memory. You are remembered now among us." Hawk placed a hand on Ethan's chest over his heart. "I dreamed of fire," he said, voice small again. "Before I found you." Fire and a white bird falling. Ethan coughed. "You're the bird," he rasped. Hawk shook his head. "You were." Behind them, the warriors began a low chant, soft, rhythmic, deep as earth shifting. It wasn't for mourning. It was for farewell. A ritual of passage, not into death but into legend. Ethan felt his limbs growing heavy. The snow around him warmed as if it remembered the sun. Hawk leaned close, pressed his forehead to Ethan's. "You are my second father," he whispered. "You gave me back to my people." Ethan's breath hitched once, then steadied. He was fading, but not broken, not bitter. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He felt seen. The warriors lifted him gently, carried him into the ruined barn, laid him in the center where the earth was scorched but still warm. Running Elk stood watch. Hawk knelt beside him, the hawk feather now tied around his own wrist. Outside, the drums rose slow and steady like a heartbeat returning. Word would spread fast. The Flint Riders were dead. The child they hunted reborn. The white man who saved him etched into fire and blood. A message to all who would draw lines in snow with bullets and brands. Some debts are paid in kind, others in sacrifice. As dawn crept over the hills, the warriors disappeared into the forest. Not a track left behind, just ash, just smoke, and the wind whispering something no white man would ever fully understand, but Hawk would carry it always. Ethan Cole had no blood ties to the boy, no reason to stand, no glory to gain. But he had stood. That was enough. That would always be enough. 3 days later, the snow melted enough to reveal the wreckage of the barn, blackened beams like ribs in the earth, the charred iron bell still hanging crooked above what used to be the stall door. A hawk circled overhead, gliding on the updraft, silent but ever watching. No one in town ever claimed the bodies. The sheriff came out once, took one look at the burned-out homestead, counted the corpses half buried in snow, and rode back without a word. Folks whispered, of course, about Ethan Cole, about the Flint Riders, about ghosts in the trees and the sound of drums at dawn. But no one dared dig deeper. Not here. Not after what was left behind. The only sign of what had really happened was a feather red-tipped standing upright in the snow beside a scorched rifle. Travelers sometimes found it. They said it never fell even in the wind. The boy was never seen again by white men. Some said he'd returned to the Lakota Rose to lead under his father, carried the old ways into new fires. Others said he wandered like a hawk itself, drifting between shadows, watching and waiting for injustice to rise again. But one thing was certain: wherever the boy went, stories followed. Stories of a silent child with eyes like storm clouds and a feather tied to his wrist. Of how he was saved by a white hermit with a ghost for a wife and a rifle that never missed when it mattered. They called it legend, but it wasn't legend to Ethan. It was memory. Even in death, he lingered in that place. Not in body, but in story. In the crack of frost under boot, the whisper of pine needles brushing in the wind. In the lone hawk's cry echoing through the valley. His grave was simple, no marker, no stone. Just the feather, and beneath it the pipe-running elk had left. Together they told the truth that redemption costs blood. That sometimes a man who once turned his back on the world could still turn and face its fire when it mattered most. And that love, even when lost, can still guide a man's hand in his final hour. A week later, a rider passed through a woman from the trading post. She found the feather still standing untouched by wind or time. She stood in silence, then reached down and placed a small pouch beside it. Inside were 6 stones, river stones smooth and gray, placed in a perfect line. One for each rider who'd fallen, one for the boy, one for the man who'd saved him. As she rode off, snow began to fall again. Slow, gentle, covering the earth like a final breath. In the end, it wasn't gunfire or vengeance that lingered. It was the image of a boy walking alone through snow, his breath like smoke eyes, scanning the world with a quiet knowing. And it was the wind always, the wind carrying the faint scent of ash pine and something softer, something like peace. Some stories aren't told to be remembered, they're told because they remind us what it costs to become human again. Watch the next story if your heart's still steady, and subscribe to walk with more ghosts of the West.